and welcome back to the Permissionless podcast. Of course, as always, brought to you by the team at Guardian, and we're going deep with DeFi teams who are building on the edge and really stretching the imagination of what's possible in an open, permissionless, on-chain execution environment. And our guest today is really literally defining the meaning of programmable money. Today we have Fran from Superfluid, and they've got a really interesting perspective on economies and the velocity of money. You'll see shortly how they kind of dive into a level up, a derivative thinking of accounting for money as a rate and having that be the base accounting of balance in an economy, and how this takes the velocity of money to infinity if you take the limit. And so it's very interesting to think, what are the externalities of this way of thinking and this way of approaching things? And so we go deep on this idea and so much more that's possible with the Superfluid app with Fran, and I think you'll have some deep ideas after this conversation. And we get to hear, even beyond that, just about his approach to entrepreneurship and how he sees opportunities in the space in general. But of course, before we can dive into the full conversation, as always, my name is Owen, and over 3.5 years ago, I founded Guardian based on the premise that DeFi would house trillions of dollars of assets, and that a stepwise jump in the tier of security available had to be made to ship confidently in that environment. And so today, I'm happy to say that we have achieved that standard necessary at Guardian. We use not one, but two distinct auditing teams accompanied by a world-renowned lead researcher and a full-time dedicated developer building a fuzzing suite for the entire scope across the stack. And through this distinct methodology that we have, we're able to gain so much confidence in the code base at hand that we're able to put our own funds up as a bounty on the contracts on behalf of the project. So now at this point, it's really just up for DeFi to catch up. But now, of course, without further ado, let us get into this conversation with Fran from Superfluid. Well, Fran, thanks for taking the time to hop in with us today. And we've got a lot to talk about, and obviously you've got a pretty long history here in DeFi with Superfluid. So excited to dive into all of that. But really, before we even get into the Superfluid protocol and all the different things that we could cover there, how did you find your way into DeFi, and what kind of got you into the industry to start with?
So I've done a bunch of different things in my life. I started, I guess my first job was as an entrepreneur. I started my own company with some friends out of high school and when I was 18. And then after that, did a bunch of stuff, moved around, lived in a bunch of different places. Eventually, some crazy dude I met talked to me about crypto and prediction markets, and specifically assassination markets. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up yourself. But yeah, assassination markets got me really excited because it's like really sci-fi-ish stuff, and I'm like, wow, that's possible right now. And he's like, well, not yet. The UX sucks, but it still sucks 5 years later. But it was fun. That was 2017. And then basically at some point I went to a meetup and I got a job in crypto. So that was great. Immediately got a job, jumped right into the operator side.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people kind of maybe traded for a long time, or they worked in tech for a long time. I was never in tech, and I was never in finance, and I just jumped in straight to work. In that case, I was doing marketing. I don't think I'm very good at marketing, but I ended up learning how to code, learning all the other stuff, and did all the other things. And I still occasionally do marketing, but it's not my strongest suit probably. So that was 2019, and then I started working with my current co-founder in 2020. And that was 2017. Sorry. That was 2017. I started working with my co-founder in 2018, and then in 2019 we launched our first public kind of crypto product, which was a derivative of DAI. So 2019, just to set the stage, DeFi is Uniswap, MakerDAO, Compound, and BZX. And pulled together, right? BZX blew up shortly thereafter, about 6 months later. Compound is blowing up now. MakerDAO is still going well. Uniswap still going well, right? And Pulled Together is kind of recovering from the lawsuit, right? And in that context, we launched one of the first derivatives on top of DAI, which was, well, on top of Compound actually, which was called RDAI, and it was kind of a yield derivative, right? So again, very, very early days. And basically, when we were building that, we came up with the idea for Superfluid, and we dropped that product. Um, Incidentally, at the time, yields all went to zero. So
Yeah.
there was actually a period when yields were negative on MakerDAO, right, in
Yeah.
2020. So, at the time it felt like, oh, yields are going to disappear as a thing in DeFi. Well, we were quite wrong about that one. But anyway, started working on Superfluid, and it's been really fun. Superfluid's kind of, let's say, niche is payments, which is not a very sexy niche if you do it in a DeFi way, right? It's sexy if you do on ramps, off ramps. That's how everybody in payments makes money, but we
Yeah.
don't, right? We're like pure crypto, and it's a very tough market basically.
Hmm.
But I think what we're doing is really cool. So, still excited to work on it 4 years later. But yeah, we haven't, seen the explosive growth of our products all because basically nobody really wanted to use crypto for payments for the longest time.
Yeah.
And we are proposing a way of making payments, which is very crypto native and very weird and very hard to
Yeah.
square with a lot of kind of traditional ways of doing things. So yeah, it's definitely been an uphill battle, but it's been a lot of fun as well in the process. Yeah.
And of course, making payments composable and all this stuff, a lot of stuff that we can get into there. And it's crazy to see that you guys working on the same project for what has it been like 5, 6 years at this point plus. Usually what you see is like folks like just jumping project to project to project. So it's like
Yeah,
refreshing to see a team like actually focusing on one problem for an extended period of time instead of, just like launching new like experiment.
for sure.
But the experimentation is good, but it's also just refreshing to see folks, really focus on one problem and make progress on.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I often push back actually on the framing of the problem solution,
Yeah,
because I think it doesn't really fit in a lot of cases, right? And it like if you're if you're educated in kind of Silicon Valley, then you're told that that's what a startup should be about,
yeah,
right? But crypto's allowed us to basically fund stuff that doesn't fit into problem solution kind
yeah,
of statements, right? And I think that's great because it allows us to do things and take kind of outlandish bets sometimes, right? Because Ethereum didn't really solve anything, right?
that's
But
true.
it's still a huge kind of 0 to 1 moment for our industry, and it's created a lot of things that like it's an enabler for things that solve problems, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. And I think of Superfluid the same way, like when if you try to frame it, if you try too hard to frame it as a problem, you're like, well, haven't you always wanted to get paid every second? And I'm like, no, I literally never
yeah,
thought about that, right? So it doesn't really fit in that, but I do think it's an enabler for a lot of efficiency and a lot of kind of new ways of building things, and it enables us to build a lot of things that weren't possible before. And in the meantime, it challenges the way we think about money and the way it moves. And we can go into that. I'd love to go into that, nerd about it a bit, but yeah, it's not something anybody's done before. There's a lot of things about
yeah,
Superfluid that people don't really understand until they go really deep,
yeah,
because when they think about money, when they think about payments, they are they have all these mental models which are useful to help you understand the world, but when you apply them to something completely new, then you kind of only understand half of it, if that makes
yeah,
sense, right? So a lot of people, so just maybe to give an intro to Superfluid for people who've never heard about us, right? So Superfluid is known as a protocol for money streaming or token streaming, right? Streaming in abstract for tokens or value is this concept that every second some value is moving from one account to another, right? So imagine a payment which, instead of happening instantaneously, right? So instantaneously would mean like money has always worked, right? I have a coin, I give it to Owen. Now it's his, right? Or in the case of a bank transfer, click some buttons, I move money in the bank, right? In the bank ledger. In crypto, click some button, sign a transaction, gets validated, money moves in the ledger, right? And ultimately, what makes electronic money or even electronic payments, right? What allows them to exist is the ledger and the rules of the ledger, right? And in most people's minds, the ledger can only be made in one way, right? And that is the way traditional banks have a ledger and the way ERC20 is built, right? ERC20 is modeled on electronic money that existed before it. But in the land of smart contracts, you can do a lot more crazy things. And that's actually what Superfluid is. So Superfluid is an ERC20, which is, so it's a token standard, which is fully compatible with ERC20, but adds a bunch of functionality which allows the money to move in real time without making transactions.
Yeah.
And that's where people, people kind of don't understand how that works, because you're like, wait, transaction equals money movement, right? Because I guess kind of software engineers borrowed the word from finance, or finance borrowed the word from engineering, I'm not sure, but we kind of think of transaction equal payment.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you think about it from a computer science point of view, transaction means updating a database,
Mhm.
right? While payment means money changing hands, right? So those are actually two different things. And if you split them, you're halfway to understanding how Superfluid works, right?
Yeah.
So normal payments in crypto, instant payment, you actually update the ledger the same moment the payment happens, because the transaction changes the state of your balance and updates the state of the recipient, right? And that's what makes the transfer happen. The way Superfluid works is very different. So Superfluid calculates balances. It doesn't store them.
Yeah.
So what that means is basically for each user, instead of having just one data slot occupied with the balance, we have a bunch of different data points, right? And we can go into the nitty-gritty, but the point is there's a lot of extra columns in this table, right? For each user, there's a lot of data points. So when you make a transaction, so for example, a transaction in Superfluid could be create stream, right? So I want to send Owen $0.01 a second. That's what a transaction looks like. So you send a transaction to the blockchain, and the transaction will change the data points in my personal ledger that refer to how much I am sending every second. And it will update your data to say how much you are receiving every
Mhm.
second, right? So there is a transaction that changes the data, but then what happens is the next block, when you go and ask the blockchain what your balance is, it will compute your balance based on that data that changed in the previous transaction, but with a new timestamp, because the timestamp is moving forward every block, right? So the timestamp will make it so that the calculation returns a different result at every block, which is what's moving your balance, if
Yep.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So
I kind of
like
speed run through it, but tell me if it doesn't make sense.
no, of course, like a bank account that's adjusting in real time, and then when you actually come and withdraw against it, you've got, whatever the current balance is to the block timestamp to withdraw.
Yeah, yeah, but you don't have to. Okay, so correct, but you don't have to withdraw.
Yeah.
So what's kind of really cool with Superfluid is that this is not a system built on top of money. This is money. Like there are tokens, like our token, which is built like this. There is no, you never have to take your money out, if that makes sense, right? This is literally what the ERC20 is, how the ERC20 is built. And what that means is that you don't have to think of the settlement as when I take the money out. The same way you don't think of your bank account like it settles when I cash out at the ATM,
Yeah.
right? Like because at this point we've got into the mental model that the money in the bank is real money, even though
Yeah.
it's not, right? Um, so with Superfluid, there's two ways to use it. One is that you use it on top of your existing tokens, right? So you have USDC and then Super USDC, which is a wrapper, and then you kind of go between the two. And in that case, it's like you said, right? It's like you have your cash, you put it in this extra system, you move it around, and then you withdraw, right? A bit like people use I mean, you used to use PayPal like that. I think Venmo's works like that. I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with American stuff, but I assume that's how it works, right? You kind of
Yeah,
put money in, take it out.
pretty much.
But for tokens that are launched natively through Superfluid, like our own token, and a couple of stable coins now, there's a few things in our ecosystem that are launching tokens directly, then you never withdraw it. So that's the token. It streams. It's a normal token, but it streams. It's the money of the future. And where that gets really exciting is with stablecoins specifically, I think is where it's most exciting.
Mhm.
So I'm going to describe a scenario and then ask you a question. So I'm sending $1 a second to Brendan. Okay. I have $10 in my account. I'm sending $1 a second to Brendan. Brendan is sending $1 a second to Owen. Then Owen is sending me $1 a second. Okay. I have $10. Now I transfer those $10 somewhere else. Now there's $0 in my account, but there's $3 a second moving around. Where's the money?
Is it not just staying the same?
It is, but there are $3 moving around every second. Like there
Is
are
it
three
still between the
dollars
three
of
of us?
economic. It well, it's kind of it's a paradox, right? But that's what happens when you have infinite velocity, basically. So there's two things that are happening here. The money is basically settling in all the accounts at the same time, right? And that's something blockchains don't usually do. So blockchains usually settle sequentially, right?
Right.
So we would make free transactions. I send you $1, you send it to Owen, Owen sends it to me. But if they're not ordered in that way, it's going to fail,
Hmm.
right? Because they have to happen in order in a blockchain normally. With Superfluid, they don't. With Superfluid, all the streams settle at the same time, which means you can spend $1 at the same time as you're receiving it, which means you don't ever receive it,
Yeah,
right? And it kind of you can basically it spins around at
yeah,
infinite velocity, which means you don't actually need to have the money to do it, which is kind of the mental
yeah,
where I said at the beginning, it's money, but it works in a way that doesn't really fit into how we think about money usually working, right?
yeah. You need the income, not the money. And I imagine at the contract level, you guys are tracking a rate for each of these accounts. That's what each account has associated with.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And it's a net rate. That's the interesting thing,
yeah,
right? So if you have income and outgoing money at the same time, it nets to zero, which leaves your balance kind of not
yeah,
moving, but the money is moving, right? And
yeah,
um, yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, somebody built a prototype for an exchange where the exchange itself is an AMM, but has no deposits. Like it's just continuously shifting money from the buyers to the sellers, and it never holds any, but it has like super high volumes. Does
yeah,
that make sense?
yeah.
Like you can do some really crazy stuff basically, because you've got net settlement, which is something again like nobody else really does that in crypto.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
definitely.
And the fundamentally, you're making sure that everything is still solvent with kind of like a liquidation
Exactly. Yeah.
mechanism built on top of this, which is cool, and we can get into that as well. But yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about like problem solution statement, Ethereum was more of like technological breakthroughs. They're not amenable to a problem, like a distinct problem.
Exactly.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like you have some sort of breakthrough, and then in the case of Ethereum, at least, an entire ecosystem comes out of that. And now that enables us to solve distinct problems in a way using this technology. In some cases, it creates new problems like MEV and all this stuff,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is also super interesting. The creation of problems that can be then solved. Um, what kind of okay, so what kind of opportunities, much like Ethereum allows for, like on on-chain, AMMs and all this stuff that you couldn't even think of, you
Yeah.
couldn't conceive of before. What kind of things has Superfluid empowered that you guys are seeing today?
So so I mean today mostly crypto native stuff, to be
Yeah.
honest, right? Very crypto native stuff. We've I think there's a really cool exchange built on top of Superfluid that allows you to buy stuff every second, right? It gives you a really good price, basically. It's got again, the point is crypto is about is about kind of changing money and taking it out of the state's control, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
realistically, we're just speculating, right, all the time. So our the biggest product built on Superfluid at the moment is probably this one, which is an exchange, right? There are some other cool stuff, cool things built for distributions, right? So just very efficiently distributing money a number of people in a constant way and kind of programmatic on-chain way, right? There's some really cool things built there, and some of them use this kind of multi-level thing. So, there's like a bigger org sending money to a smaller one, sending money to a smaller one, sending money to a bunch of different people who then maybe are streaming to Super Boring the exchange to swap it to dollars, right? So you've got these things that are getting quite complex as well to look at. Um, but I think one of the things that I, for example, would be very excited to see happen, which hasn't really materialized except for in very small examples, is subscriptions.
Hmm.
So you can do subscriptions very well with Superfluid because
Yeah.
it's just one transaction and then you're kind of paying forever, right? And as long as you're solvent, like you said, as long as you never run out of money, that this subscription will keep going, right? So one really cool thing that we saw last year around May was when we launched this app called Alpha Friends. It's still going, although the volumes are nowhere near what they were at launch. And when it launched, it peaked at 200,000 subscriptions.
Wow.
And what was really cool there is that it was a network of people paying each other, right? So there were people. So imagine I would subscribe to your channel, then you would subscribe to mine, right? So basically, money was circulating, right? And that's where it gets really exciting because with Superfluid, the volume was just insane. You know, people were running. We call it margin, right? So imagine if you've got $1,000 moving through your account every day, but you only have actually $100 in your account, right? With Superfluid, you can do that because it nets out in real time. And people were running really, really what we called highly leveraged
Yeah.
accounts,
Yeah.
which basically means, again, they had very low margin, right? So maybe they'd have $100 and they'd have, money spinning through really fast because there was some farming things
I see.
going on,
Yeah.
right? So people were trying to lever it up really, really crazily. And it was so cool to see. You had these 200,000 accounts that were spinning money around really fast.
Yeah.
Um, and then what happened was basically smart contract bug, which funnily enough, it didn't lose any money, but it basically broke the psychology of people because
Yeah.
they stopped getting streaming rewards and they started getting chunky rewards,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what happens is imagine um you so you're streaming out $1,000 a month, but now the $1,000 you're receiving, they stop streaming, right? Now you're getting them staggered, right? Which means when you look at your balance, it's going down real fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like going down. It looks like it's going to go to zero. It never actually does because you do get these payments, but it looks like it's going down. Everybody freaked out
Yeah.
and there was a massive deleveraging. It was very exciting to watch, very sad for us,
Yeah.
but very exciting. But that kind of showed us that you can build these kind of very efficient economies. Like basically, the amount of money in the system was very low in TVL, but the amount of volume of kind of money changing hands in the system was super, super high, right?
Yeah.
And we calculated it was like 20 times more. The money was moving 20 times faster than in the normal economy,
Yeah.
right? In this kind of subsector of the economy, right? I mean, again, it's a very small thing, but it's kind of um, a testing bed of what we imagine would be a world running on money streams, right?
Yeah.
So imagine everybody's salaries, everybody's rent, everybody's pension, everybody's interest, it's all
Yeah.
streaming. That's what it would look like. Some people would run on very low margins and have kind of a very
Yeah.
highly leveraged life, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, money basically it would move just much faster. So that's kind
Yeah.
of the superfluid world vision.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, you mentioned like getting started in 2019. Obviously, in 2025 now, that's like a pretty long journey in crypto. And these are some pretty unique use cases. Have you felt like your vision for Superfluid has evolved like over those years, or you've seen different use cases pop up that maybe you didn't at the beginning? Or is this like, a vision that you guys had and you've been fulfilling?
I think we were looking so far, right, that the vision hasn't changed too much, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're kind of trying to, like you said, trying to solve a problem, then you can probably see the problem, right? So
Yeah.
you're kind of moving towards it, and then if the problem moves, then you move with it and pivot. In our case, we're building something that is going to make a lot of sense, probably in 30 years, right? So we're looking so far that we kind of always went towards that. And we've had a bunch of opportunities to completely pivot and do meme coins, do trading, do farming, do all of that
Yeah.
stuff. But those trends don't last long, right? And ultimately, it's not as rewarding to build something that is a fad compared to something which is potentially revolutionary, right? Like
Hmm.
I have no doubts that there's a future where everybody is using money streaming, right? Now, will they use Superfluid? I don't know. Will they be able to look back in the past and say, "Oh, these were the first guys to try that"? That was us, right? So we're, we're very bullish on it. Obviously, it but acknowledging full well that it's something that's fairly far in the future.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's kind of like you take the limit as the time to like reinvest or the time to spend in an economy goes to zero. And then it's like the economic,
Exactly.
like, and then the economy just goes infinitely levered off the back of that.
Basically, basically, yeah, which is super scary, but also exciting.
Yeah, it's really messy to think about, but it's like as long as you have that liquidation mechanism that's like keeping everything honest.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the liquidation mechanism is not a requirement, right? Like it was the solution that we found and that made the most sense 5 years ago, right?
Hmm.
It's worked perfectly. Like we've never had any major incident, even with blockchains going offline, which is our worst nightmare because
Yeah.
when blockchains go offline, um, there's this really weird thing that happens, right? So at some point, basically, imagine a blockchain that goes offline for 12 hours, right?
Yeah.
And we shit on Solana, but Polygon went offline a while ago as well, right? A few years ago. And basically, what happens is when it starts again, people start submitting transactions, and between block one and block two, the timestamp has moved 12 hours,
Yeah.
right? But there's been no transactions in the meantime. But the time has moved, which means for Superfluid, what that means is the money's been streaming the whole time. So
Yeah.
everybody who ran out of money in that period
Yeah.
should have been liquidated, but wasn't liquidated,
Mhm.
right? Which means now we have a potential problem, right? But we have safeguards against that, and it's always been fine. So
Yeah.
again, liquidations work, but Superfluid V2, which we're um, starting to talk about seriously now, actually won't have liquidations. So we found a better solution,
Really.
and it will be fully because the problem is liquidations. If you don't do them, they
Yeah.
do cause problems, right?
Yeah.
Because our streams basically keep going even if you don't have money, which basically means you're printing money out of nowhere to fund these streams. It's
Yeah.
not great. Again, it never happens, but it could. But we found a way to completely eliminate that problem, and very excited about it.
Yeah. So is that kind of like having some rule set in there to stop the stream or something like this? What does that look like?
No, so that's not possible because of how. So the graph computational problems, right? So with Superfluid, you can have a incredibly complicated graph dependency
Yeah.
to tell you. So imagine, I ran out of money, and then like 100 steps down, somebody gets fucked because of that, right?
Yeah.
That can happen in Superfluid because you can have infinite hops on
Yes,
how far
meaning,
your
yeah.
money is moving, right? Which means on chain you can't compute it. Like there's just no way to do it. And what that tells us is that we can't enforce stream stopping on chain because basically it's impossible to compute the whole network for a single account, right? So that has to happen off chain. So liquidations are an easy way to do it. The way V2 will work, basically it will use some sort of ZK to prove certain things that will allow you to not need to compute the whole thing on chain, because you can't compute the whole thing on chain, but you can compute it off chain. So you compute it off chain and then prove it on chain, and then
I see.
your system, and that's cool because then the system becomes fully proven, right? And it's ZK proof, so there's no question about it, right? You can prove the state of the system in a succinct manner on chain. So it's a big change for us. Because to give you an example, the example I did before where we're streaming money around and there's no liquidity is not actually possible right now with Superfluid,
Yeah.
because of our liquidation system, right?
Yeah.
So, and what that means is at the moment when you open a stream, you have to put up 4 hours worth of security deposit of that stream.
Yeah.
So if I want to send, $1 an hour, I have to lock $4 into the security deposit. Which means that at the moment Superfluid doesn't have infinite velocity because those $4 create an economic drag on the system, right? Like the money is actually locked. $4 are locked, right? With Superfluid V2, we will not need that anymore. So that's when you actually get infinite velocity of money. So that's really exciting. Even though it's a really small thing in a sense, it kind of eliminates the last amount of friction that we've had to add to the system to make it work. So for us, it's like a really big deal. It's like eliminating that last bit of friction is really, really cool.
Well, that's the hardest piece is like, how do you get to infinite velocity? You've got to get like down to the infinitesimal, like last marginal amount. And then like removing, like going from 90% to 95% to 99% to 99.9%. Like those
100
last like marginal amounts, those are the hardest.
are the hardest one.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why we went with the liquidation system, because it's like, it's still pretty fast, nobody will really notice this. And in fact, most users don't need to know it to use the system. Very few people really understand how it works, and it works fine, right? But eliminating it still feels like a victory, because then you have 100% and you'll basically be able to open a stream, which means make a payment without having money in your account potentially. As long as in the same block you receive a payment from someone else.
Yeah. It could be like it's such a big idea, and it's like almost hard to grasp like what this could mean for, like, let's say hypothetically you get like the economy into Superfluid. What happens? Like what is the outcome? What are the externalities of having like
Hyperinflation.
Yeah, I suppose.
Basically.
Yeah.
Because you don't need money anymore,
Yeah,
right?
it's like having a ton of credit.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically what would happen is so money would start moving much faster. People who are not able to move their money faster will be at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're less efficient, right? Basically, it's capital efficiency, right? It's how fast you're able to reinvest your money, right? And people who have very good automations will be able to run on zero current accounts, right? People who don't have access to good financial technology will probably run in a very similar way to what they're running now, right?
Yeah.
So change is never instant and everywhere, right? It's always like somewhere first. The future is not evenly distributed, right? So what's going to happen is you'll probably start seeing a few companies use this for all of their internal systems and get a significant edge, right? Because suddenly they're operating on very low working capital, they're moving money around internally really fast. And, all their competitors be like, what the fuck, how are you guys doing this? And then it will cascade into more adoption, right? But humans are always kind of consumers, or humans are always the slowest to adopt new things, right? So even now, we're still using cash, even though it has a bunch of problems, and we're still using cash, right? And I think we'll probably still be using cash in 50 years, just because our generation might, some people in our generation might still want to use it, right? Um, so again, consumers don't. So, and the other thing is that capital efficiency is not something that's easily understood by consumers, but
Hmm.
it's something that is very easily understood by corporations,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have a CFO and you tell them, hey, you don't need to have any money in the bank account anymore. You can keep it all invested at all times and
Yeah.
still run and still have every payment made on time. They'll be very excited about that, right? Assuming that all the other frictions attached to this are solved. But if you tell that to me, I'm like, oh, okay, so I can invest a bit faster, right? Uh, okay, I can put an extra dollar into my
Yeah.
bank every day, right? That's great, but it's not going to change my profitability, or it's not going to change my life as much, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we get to kind of some of the issues with adoption of this, which is that there's not really any big companies in crypto.
Yeah.
It's mostly individuals, amateurs, prosumers trying stuff out. It's not it's not that easy to get to the point where these hypothetical big corporations want to adopt a crypto-based payment system, basically. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. For especially for like a high OpEx type business, this could be
Exactly.
something that unlocks a ton of value there. And also, I mean, Superfluid, the way I think about it, it's kind of like the derivative of money. It's like now instead of thinking in like you have X amount, you're thinking in rate. I have this rate.
Exactly.
And then like, let's say like a CFO operating based on Superfluid, they're operating based on, okay, let's account for the rate and look at the rate accounting
Yeah.
versus like how much money we actually have. Yeah, and I think obviously that just viewpoint just lends itself way more
And
to
it's
capital efficiency.
and it's real time. I mean,
Yeah.
they're already doing that, right? Even just the government is doing that, right? When they talk about refinancing the debt, that's
Yeah.
basically in and out if your books, and you have to kind of balance them, right? But people always like they're either doing it yearly if they're a small company, or they're doing it monthly if they're a bigger company, but nobody does it by the second yet,
Yeah.
right? But that's what we're proposing, and if you if you think about it long enough, it actually makes a lot of sense. And it
Yeah.
actually is arguably simpler to understand. So to give you an example, right, even just from a person's point of view, right, you have your rent payment, your salary, and your credit card repayment, and your subscriptions, right? And if I ask you when you're paying those, you might say monthly. And if I press you, you'll tell me, oh, my salary's on the 15th, my rent is on the 14th. And I'm like, wait, so you have to pay your rent the day before you get paid? And you're like, yeah, that sucks. So I have to keep a full month of rent in my bank account the whole time to pay for it. I'm like, well, if you were using Superfluid, um, that would all be settled every
Yeah.
second, right? So your money would come in, it would go out, and you would know at every point in time how much your rate, like you said, right?
Mhm.
The derivative, your rate, how much
Mhm.
is your rate? And is it up or down, right? And that's all you have to optimize for, which means basically you kind of collapse this 2D calendar into a one-dimensional list of rates that are
Yeah.
either positive or negative, and all you need to care about is the net, which incidentally is exactly what the ledger looks like inside the contracts, right?
Yeah.
It's literally one number, is it going up or down? And that's, all you need to know. Um, but yeah, I mean, anyway, sorry, geeking out a bit, but
No,
yeah,
it's fascinating to think about. And I mean, I could even imagine there could be financial instruments that even furthermore increase the like capital efficiency or like credit of the system insofar as like, let's say I have some rate, some financial instrument could let me borrow against that rate. And then now I get that credit immediately today. And then, it
yeah.
just compounds upon itself.
I
So
think
that's really interesting.
the most likely result of this in personal finance specifically is that you would effectively always buy everything on credit, probably.
Yeah.
And then you would simply have a rate that you're repaying,
Hmm.
right? So you've got like your credit card repayment rate, a dollar a second, and then the credit card just allows you to pay for anything. And if you kind of start buying a bunch of stuff, it's just going to increase your rate of repayment,
Yeah.
right? And that way you never actually have to deal with having cash in your account, right? Why
Yeah.
would you? Right? Yeah, I don't need cash in my account. I can just borrow when I need to against my rate. So then you literally only have one number, and it's
Yeah.
not the balance, it's the rate, which
Yeah.
is really cool if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because a lot of people in, like the working class, like most of the people in the world are kind of operating on that basis already, in that they don't have a ton of, cash just sitting around. They
Of
are
course.
living like when I get my paycheck, then I pay my rent and all this stuff.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah, it would be really interesting to see kind of like a small like economy that's just like operating based on this and see like what happens. Like you said, you had um that group of people that, they had very little
Yeah.
actual, but the volumes were just crazy. Like that is such an interesting case study, and I'd love to see like hopefully, we can get another sort of instance of that where, there are no smart contract issues, and people don't get out. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
It,
that's
it,
fascinating.
honestly, it's very exciting to start seeing this. We'll see. I don't think mass adoption is around the corner, but there's definitely, like, we've been around for a while. We've been working on Superfluid for a while, right?
Yeah.
And 5 years ago, I knew everyone who was getting paid in
Hmm.
crypto, right? On Ethereum. Like I could point them out in a room, and they were all in the same room because we all went to the same conferences.
Yeah.
It was literally five dudes, right? Um, Now it's not like that, right? There's like 100 EVM chains, and on each of them, there's people getting paid the salary in crypto, right? So like the space has grown hugely, and the financial products available for these people are much more than they were before.
Yeah.
So we've gone much, we've grown a lot vertically as well, right? Before, people would be like, oh, how do I off ramp? How do I on ramp? How do I spend the money? I mean, nowadays there's like 100 different credit cards, the crypto debit cards, basically most of the problems have been solved, right?
Hmm.
So I don't expect to see mass adoption tomorrow, but I do expect to see some very kind of concentrated groups of people who will start using crypto products a lot more heavily,
Yeah.
right? Um, so again, the kind of prosumers, and that's kind of where I hope we will start seeing it at, right? Somewhere with a lot of concentration of crypto prosumers,
Hmm.
Balaji's network state
Yeah.
kind of thing. Do you really want to pay your network state subscription once a month? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's so old school, you know?
Yeah. If you do want to pay it in crypto, like it makes way more sense to open a stream on Superfluid. And yeah, I mean that's the thing with all of these like let's say like continuous recurring payment solutions in crypto. They always have that root problem of like, oh, you've got to top up your account and then it just
Yeah,
pays out from there. That's only a problem if the application is only for making this payment, because then I
exactly.
have to put the money there and it's like I've already paid that money today and I've got to pay up front. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
a
yeah.
matter of it getting streamed out from the smart contract or whatever custodial solution. Um, but with something like a superfluid, you've got the utility of your money still, and it's just being streamed in real time on the back end. That just affects your rate. And then maybe you've got, other things coming in that are m maybe paying that for you, or um, but you can still access that capital, and it's not like just having to like set aside this lump sum that's just going to sit there and like serve absolutely no use. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kind of cool financial products that can be built to enable you to always make the most of your capital, right? The simplest thing would be, I have some sort of money market, or let's just say kind of yield pool, right? Where I'm earning yield, and then I withdraw from that exactly the same amount that I am spending in
Yeah.
these other places, right? Which could be more or less of the yield, right? I don't know, right? It could be more, could be less. But in any case, I'm only withdrawing as much as I need to pay these people. So basically 100% of my capital is invested, right? Even though I've got outgoing payments. That, that's kind of possible. But we're not there yet. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be built. If anyone watching this is a developer, come and help us crack these problems, because there's some funky math there that is not super easy to do.
Yeah, on that note, are you guys like incentivizing anyone to build on Superfluid or have like dev grants for building some of these things out?
So Superfluid recently launched a token. So the token was launched on the 14th of February. So we're about 2 months
Nice.
later now. The token doesn't directly go to developers at the moment. But what happens is basically the token is distributed in streams over time, and you earn it by using applications built on Superfluid.
Mhm.
So basically the idea is, rather than giving tokens to devs, which we've seen not work very well, because devs will build, but they won't actually distribute, which are two different things, right? Instead, we basically give tokens to users, which means if you have a product, you build out of Superfluid, you can basically get a bunch of incentivized users, and then it's up to you to monetize those users, right? So, charge a fee to the user, and the user will use it anyway because they're getting a rebate using getting Superfluid tokens, right? And that's worked quite well so far. There's a bunch of apps in our ecosystem that have reported, much higher volumes, much higher usage. There's 2,500 people who have started streaming donations in the last 2 months, which is really cool. And all of this just because of the token, right? Every 3 months, we have different apps and different campaigns that kind of join this distribution program. So it is very likely, because I'm already having some chats about it, it's very likely that there will be something for developers in the next season, but it's not public yet. But definitely, come and check Superfluid out, and we'll probably, by the time you find this, it might be public already. But yeah, there's most likely going to be something in the next season for developers.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds great. And overall for the token, does this sound like a governance model?
Yeah.
What are some of the other like use cases that you have?
So the token is definitely for governance. The interesting thing is that governance is basically deputized to distribute the token, right? Which means that basically all these apps have an incentive to bribe basically the token holders to vote for them, so that basically they keep getting those distributions that are giving them fees, right? So it's it's not something necessarily when you bootstrap an app, right? You don't have that much money, but basically if you build an app, launch a token, then you can just kind of send some of those tokens to Superfluid stakers to convince them to vote for your app in the next cycle of distributions, which basically has it's a good flywheel. It makes people want to hold the token even though it doesn't have fees at the moment. But at the same time, it basically creates these fees through bribes.
Very cool. Those are some interesting incentives going on there. And for anyone listening to this that wants to maybe check out like apps in the Superfluid ecosystem, what's like the best place we can point them to?
Oh, I would recommend. So first off, check if you're eligible. If you're eligible for tokens, because a bunch of people are eligible but don't know. So if you want to check, I always use bankless.com. They have a thing called claimables. You just put your address in, put any address in, and it will tell you if you're eligible. So definitely check that out. And basically, if you are eligible, then go to claim.superfluid.org. And there you'll be able to claim your SUP tokens, and you'll also see a directory of apps that you can play with to earn more tokens, right? So that's what I would recommend. I think all the main apps are on there, and if they're not there now, they will be in a month in the next season. So definitely worth checking out. But I guess my favorite app is probably Super Boring. So it's superboring.xyz, and it's basically a market. It allows you to basically dollar cost average or buy over time any assets, well, any listed asset, but it kind of lists all the main ones, um, getting the best price. So you mentioned MEV before. There's no MEV here because um, well, technically because your purchases are happening at every block, but in an unordered way, which means nobody can front run you because the settlement is kind of not depending on the order of the transactions. So yeah, there's no MEV, and it basically allows you to buy stuff at a very good price over time. So if you're a long-term investor or if you're a really bad seller, then I recommend it. And when I say bad seller, it's people who never sell and then they regret never selling, right? You can be a bit more disciplined here. Just stream out some ETH or some Bitcoin, and it will automatically sell it for you. And you know you're always selling at the average price, and you won't regret it.
Awesome. Yeah. We also talked about, updating that or replacing rather the liquidation mechanism. Is there anything else like, interesting coming up that you're working on that, people should know about?
Um, so not directly, but there's a bunch of stuff in our ecosystem. I think one that's coming up very, very soon on Arbitrum. There's a new project called Nerite, Nerite.org, and they're launching a streamable stablecoin. And I'm very excited about that because uh, it's a native super token, right? So it's a Superfluid powered token, which means basically you can stream it without needing to think about anything around the kind of some of the more exotic UX that we have sometimes. And I think that's going to power a bunch of really cool stuff because I don't know, it's just this really cool thing. If you have some balance, you can start a subscription, one transaction, your balance will go down or up depending on your streams. Like all the things we've talked about now, kind of the first step for those is having streamable stablecoins. And with Superfluid so far, it's always been wrappers. So it's always this two levels, and then people think it's only money when I take it out, right? But in the case of Nerite, it is money even if you don't take it out, right? And
No.
I think it's going to help a lot of people understand Superfluid more natively and kind of use it more directly. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. Um, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that's not public yet, but should be live in the season 2 of our rewards, which is starting in May. So yeah, definitely, join our Discord, follow us on Twitter, and keep up to date because yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff coming.
Yeah, that is really exciting because it's to me it's like the real power of the economics of what you've created becomes unlocked only when we have all the capital inside of the superfluid ecosystem, inside of that accounting world.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then when you do, like all that money just gets like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, just like supercharged and made like infinitely efficient. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to see how that goes and what kind of utility everybody is getting from it. I was also interested how so okay, so you mentioned the DCAing mechanism. How do folks get custody of these assets in a stream-like manner? Is there somebody who's owning it and then like streaming it out to you as you're buying it? And then of course, how do you figure out what the
Um,
cost is in real time? How does that like
yeah,
work in
so
the
okay, let me kind of backtrack a couple of things. So first thing, sorry, before I forget, if anybody is getting paid in crypto right now, tell your employer to pay you with Superfluid. It's the easiest way to earn Superfluid tokens. Everybody basically who gets paid in Superfluid, there's a whitelisting process, and that allows you to earn Superfluid tokens. So if anybody listening wants to have that chat with their employer, I would recommend it because it's much better to get paid every second.
Yep.
And then you can do this really cool thing. If your income is in streams, you can then go and stream part of it to Super Boring and buy ETH or
Yeah.
Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So how does Super Boring work? So first off, I took some shortcuts when I explained it. Um, the buying, so Super Boring is not a streaming exchange. Let's first off say that. A pure streaming exchange is something that some people were trying to build. We've got some models for it. If anybody wants to try, that's great. But we don't have a pure streaming exchange at the moment. It's quite complicated to build.
Yeah.
And it's actually easier to build than it is to market make. So the really, really hard thing is to market make a streaming exchange.
Yeah.
And basically, we couldn't find any market maker who was willing to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a pretty, it's funny because, we're all devs, we like building stuff, but then the actual problem here was we can't find a quant that will make a model to market make it.
Yeah.
So the way Super Boring works is you stream, let's say you're buying ETH with USDC. You stream USDC, USDC accumulates in the contract, and it basically is always on sale at
arbitrage.
at the TWAP price.
Yeah.
And the TWAP price is taken from Uniswap v3, right? So you have people trading on Uniswap, and that determines a real-time TWAP price. When you start your stream, you can imagine it like you're setting a first point on that TWAP, then you set a second point, and you're basically selling USDC at the average price from A to B, right? In a section of that TWAP price charts line. And then, like you said, it's arbitrage, right? So anybody can take that, and people do, right? So they'll take that USDC, they'll settle it somewhere else, they'll take a small margin, and you are guaranteed that you've bought exactly the TWAP price at any point in time. Because you are technically not taking the market, you're making it, right?
Yeah.
So normally the reason you get MEV or you get front run or, is because you're going to the market and you're buying, and then other people buy before you, buy after you, right? And they screw you. But in this case, you are setting the price, which means there's no way to screw you, because if people don't pay you the price you asked for, then it doesn't settle, right? So you're guaranteed the average price. What you're not guaranteed, the trade-off, is that you don't know when it settles. So you don't know when the arbitrage will happen, right? We're running some bots so that it never takes too long.
Yeah.
But yeah, technically you don't know when the arbitrage happens. But yeah, to kind of compress that into a streaming exchange is significantly more complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that kind of follows the recent idea of like intents that everybody is talking about. Like it's kind of like intent-based DCAing or buying or also selling, I suppose. So that's really interesting. And so of course we kind of skirt around this idea of super apps. How long have super apps been around, and what's the overall design here?
So we put super apps in the first version of the protocol, and I really wish we hadn't. It was probably kind of pushing it, because they're very hard to build, and they complicate the protocol significantly. So I really wish, going back, that we'd done a V1 with no super apps, V2 with super apps, right? So what are super apps? Super apps are hooks, right? So everybody's talking about UniV4 hooks. Super apps are hooks for streams. Been around since 2021 when we first went live. And basically the way they work is that you can insert logic that will trigger when your contract receives a stream, when that stream is updated, or when that stream is closed. That's it. So they're hooks on basically the free kind of life cycle events of the stream. And it's a necessary feature, really, because of how streaming accounting works, right? So if you think of a normal smart contract, you will call a function and money will come into my contract, and then, I can do stuff with that money. It's in my contract. And then at some point, somebody makes another transaction and moves out, right?
Yep.
With streams, the user who sends the stream could then close the stream at any point, right? So even just having a simple contract that receives money and keeps track of it is impossible if you don't have hooks, because you don't know when that stream gets closed by the counterparty, unless it triggers logic in your contract, right? So we needed that to build even very simple use cases for streaming accounting. And yeah, that's how it works basically. So imagine I have a contract, you send me a stream, it triggers the create on-flow created hook. You update the stream, it triggers on-flow updated hook, and you close the stream, on-flow deleted hook, and it executes my logic. There's some special rules in there, which are interesting, I guess, from a kind of architectural point of view. So imagine you open a stream, right, to my contract, and then when you close the stream, my hook reverts.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? That means you're not allowed to stop paying me.
Yeah.
Right? Which means I can kind of, create a malicious hook that keeps you hostage.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good, right? Because you could have run out of money, as far as we know, right? Or in any case, it shouldn't be possible for an app to force you to pay them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to figure out how to fix that. So the way this works is that the on-flow deleted hook is not allowed to revert, which means if it reverts, it kind of, the system kicks it out. So it kind of bricks your app. So, that was one interesting thing. And there were some other things our CTO can probably talk more about, but there's some gas rules that we had to enforce, right, for kind of checking if there was a out of gas or what, why it reverts.
Yeah,
exactly. There's some interesting stuff there. That is by far the most complicated part of the protocol. I don't pretend to understand all of it. Our CTO does, obviously, he built it. But that's also, that was, part of the problem. We got hacked now 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And that was the part that was problematic, right? Because again, it is a very complicated part of the system.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, anytime there are callbacks, security researchers start to salivate because there's just so much that you could do. You could like re-enter, you could expend a ton of gas.
I know.
You could even like return some nasty data that could just be
exactly
huge, and then that could cause a ton of gas, even if you only specified a certain amount of gas to forward to that call. So there's like, there's
exactly.
Of course, the try catch has all of these like weird behaviors and solidity.
Yeah.
And I assume you guys are using something like a try catch.
Yeah. But
I mean, it is a really tough area.
Funny tangent. These are mostly quirks of Solidity, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why our CTO has now embarked on a kind of side quest. And he's actually built a new programming language for the EVM.
Really?
I mean, you should have him on probably to talk about just that, because he can nerd about it like crazy. It's called the Yolk, and it's basically Haskell for the EVM. So it compiles to Yule. It gives you Solidity too, but it's written in Haskell. So you have full functional programming. It's using something called linear types. I'm probably getting this wrong, but I think it's called linear types. It basically ensures that some of the bugs that you mentioned are impossible. So it does something called data versioning, which basically ensures that the data is always the right data, basically.
The right format.
Again, it's very complicated stuff. I definitely don't understand that. The syntax is insane. Like if you I don't know if you've ever tried to Haskell, but the syntax makes no sense to me. It's just like looking at an alien language. But it is probably very safe, right? Again, it's still very early days. I think he's probably the only person who's coded with it yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely one to watch if you're interested in looking into the next generation of smart contract development.
No, that's fascinating. Has he talked to like some teams like Arbitrum Stylus or teams that are building like alternate EVM compatible languages? Like,
I think he's probably talked to a bunch of people about it. Honestly, I try to stay
yeah,
out of it because it's too nerdy for me. I mean,
yeah,
I can't even read the contracts, you know.
yeah,
It's, it's like looking at these scrolls written in, Sumerian or something. I really, I don't even know where, if it's read up to,
yeah, like
right to left. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, definitely. I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, obviously, we've got Viper, we've got, well, obviously Solidity, and then I think we've got with Arbitrum Stylus there's some like Rust, and now of course some like Haskell like syntax. Um, it's almost like client diversity in terms of like having all these different kinds of languages that are now EVM compatible, and we'll see. I mean, that also unlocks like new use cases that probably were not. I'm interested to see like what kind of, because you've still got to consider gas and everything at a fundamental level. So that's interesting to see like what kind of constraints you have working in that language.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't know if it will be more or less gas efficient. So our CTO has this kind of way of thinking about things, which I think is it is probably a good one, which
mhm,
is that we shouldn't think too much about gas, basically. And
yeah, in the long term,
uh,
definitely.
yeah, exactly. He basically, like, and this we've had this debate for years, right? When we started, we were building for mainnet.
Yeah,
Gas was really
that's fair.
high. It was just before DeFi summer. It was very, gas was crazy in those times, right? And
Yeah,
it went 100x in a matter of a couple of months, and it was stably up at 100x, right?
yeah,
And our CTO always basically had this long-term vision that if in 5 years we're still talking about gas, then we failed, basically,
yeah,
right? Which
definitely.
I think makes sense because if you look at the history of computing, compute gets cheaper, right?
Yeah,
We know that that's the case. There's no reason to think that blockchain-based compute won't get cheaper too, right?
yeah,
For similar reasons. It's probably always going to be more expensive than non uh, verified compute, if you want,
hmm,
but it's definitely going to get cheaper over time, right? And that's been proven true, right?
yeah,
Nowadays, it's much cheaper than it used to be, and arguably even more secure than it used to be, which is
yeah,
interesting, right? Like the same amount of money will buy you a lot more compute and a lot better compute, right? So, we've got higher gas limits. Like basically, kind of his fear is proven true. So I think I kind of agree with him, and I think that's kind of also how he's building Yolk, which is not focusing too much on gas optimization
yeah,
because security is actually more important.
yeah,
Like I think any Solidity developer would probably pay a 10% gas premium to avoid a whole
yeah,
class of risks, right? Um, and so, I think sometimes it's worth having that extra piece of code in your contract that makes your contract easier to write, easier to audit, easier to read, even though it makes it slightly more expensive, right? Instead of having your assembly block that is, inscrutable.
yeah, yeah. I've audited my fair share of like hyper optimized libraries and stuff like that. Not
Yeah,
fun. Um,
not fun.
yeah, it's definitely not readable by users. Uh, but yeah, so I think directionally that's right as well. Like especially, and we've seen it with like L2s and stuff like this. Um, like I mean, gas is very cheap on like an L2. Are you guys mostly actually on L2s at this point, or what
Yeah,
is?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
we were building for mainnet, but then it was roughly the same time that the kind of roll-up centric roadmap was
yep.
rolled out, right? So we actually went L2 first. Our first deployment was on Polygon,
Hmm.
which is, not an L2, but whatever. Like it's what we had at the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we deployed on
But
Polygon.
whatever.
Exactly. It was deployed on Polygon and Gnosis first. And then Arbitrum Optimism base, just
Yeah,
kind of all of the other
yeah,
relevant EVMs. Yeah.
yep. Yeah, very
Yeah.
cool. Well, so obviously we can definitely push folks who are, if you're getting paid in crypto today, definitely head on over to Superfluid and talk about getting your stream switched over. Um, and then of course, I think it's really cool the incentive that you guys have for builders. It's very like you're going straight to the destination instead of like trying to give it to the developers to dole out. Like
Yeah,
you're going straight to what will get the developers traction for their app, which I think is the best incentive because then it's up to them to build something that users will actually get utility out of because then you can monetize that on the back of that. And then you have some like some seed traction to get started and start marketing and get some incentivized usage.
exactly.
So I love
Exactly.
that incentive in the way that you guys have done that. I think that's been something that there's so many examples of like just absolutely wasted, burned money on
Oh
just
yeah.
getting like
Yeah, yeah.
malicious, well, not malicious, but mercenary capital to just like bridge over and just sit there and then take it and then bridge back after you're done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And of course, if anybody wants to go and build and leverage that incentive, we got a lot of technical folks who are going to be listening to this. You can go head on over to Superfluid, check out the super apps. You can implement some callbacks and hopefully not cause any issues in the main system. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, building with Superfluid is a lot of fun. It allows you to do a lot of things with very simple interfaces, right? So you just give an example, right? Transfer, right? When you make an ERC20 transfer, you specify a recipient and an amount.
yep,
And create flow is almost the same. So create flow is a recipient and a rate,
yeah,
right? So it's a super intuitive API to use, right? And it allows you to make payments that go on forever. Just
yeah,
think about that,
yeah,
right? Like some of the contracts that I've written have been moving money for the past. So when we launched with a streaming auction, which was really fun. And some of those people never closed their bids. And the way this worked is that when you made a bid, you're streaming to the contract and the contract was streaming money back to you,
yeah,
right? And then when your bid was accepted, then it stopped streaming money back to you. Does
yeah.
that make sense? So it
So
was kind of
you just keep
canceling.
bidding.
Exactly. So it was canceling out your bid. And then when it accepted your bid, it would stop canceling it out, which means you were effectively paying,
Yeah,
right? And some people never close their bids. So they've been there for 4 years
yeah.
and spending no gas, right? So there's just this money moving for 4 years, no gas is spent. I don't know. I think that's really cool. There's few things in crypto that give you so much power
Yeah.
as a developer. So yeah, definitely recommend to have a look.
Yeah, indestructible. And actually, I mean, that's actually a huge problem in the Web 2, like traditional online business world, is failed payment processing. Like
Right.
for subscriptions. I forget what the rate is, but it's like something crazy, like 30% or like, I don't know, maybe it's not that high, but like 20% or something like this of like monthly billings actually just fail. And then they have
Yep.
apps, there's like payments.ai that specifically try and like solve
It's
this.
crazy. It's
But
crazy. This is something we've spent, like we've heard a bunch of times. There's some people that in our ecosystem that tried to work on the subscription products. I
yeah,
think there's a huge opportunity there because, like you said,
definitely.
it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
Like just in general, monthly payments, right? Um, so I'll tell you why I think streaming payments are significantly better than monthly payments for subscriptions, right?
Mhm.
So imagine your business, you've got subscriptions, right? You're expecting money at some point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so you're basing it on an expectation, right? But you don't actually know if you will get paid or not.
Yeah.
Like that's an insane amount of uncertainty to build a business on, right?
It is.
And those payments could have a bunch of states, right? So just imagine it as from a kind of computer science point of view, the payment could be active. It could be well, it's pending, right? And then when it's not pending, it's delayed. It could be failed. It could be in transit.
Yeah.
There's literally a million states, right,
Yeah.
that you need to track, and there's a million error failure cases. Streams are much simpler, right? You're either getting paid or you're not getting paid,
Yep.
right? There either is a stream or there was a stream, right? Like it's very binary. And I think that allows you to program everything much easier, right?
Yeah.
Oh, your stream was closed, right? Did it fail? Did a transaction fail? Well, that's up to you, but your stream is closed and we're closing your account unless you reopen it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's how kind of you can do that with super apps, right? So
Yeah.
one of our biggest users is a game on Polygon, and they basically allow you to rent land with a stream. And when your stream runs out, right? So the stream gets closed and you stop earning yield on the land
Hmm.
immediately,
Yeah.
right? There's no question marks, there's no follow-ups. It's just
Yeah. No
fully
emails.
binary automated. Exactly.
Yeah.
Which might sound harsh, but it's,
Well, that's the only
automated,
way you
right?
can build. Yeah, that's the only thing you can build off of, something that has guarantees like that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And you know that everything that has been streamed to you is settled, and you know,
Yeah.
there's you never have to, like, the really weird thing for me is that in this day and age, people are still chasing unpaid bills,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you're chasing unpaid bills, it means you worked for free,
Yeah.
right?
And now you're doing more work to try and
And now
get.
you're doing more work
Yeah.
to try and get paid. Exactly.
Yeah.
You should just get paid every second. If they stop paying you, you stop working, and then
Yeah.
there's no unpaid bills,
Yeah.
Um, but old systems are hard to die, but we'll get there.
Yeah. No, I think absolutely this problem of payment failure, and then of course, like chasing unpaid bills, it the only way that it can be totally solved is on chain. Like
For
there's
sure.
no solving this with all the intermediaries and all of the like inner like parts that just like miss each other and like all this like yeah, it's there are solutions, like there's a ton of solutions, like payments AI is one I know for sure, that they're trying to solve it in like the traditional online business world, but like to totally solve it, it's only going to happen on chain. So I think uh, that's a huge problem that you guys are probably positioned pretty well to be able to solve. I mean, especially immediately for the on-chain stuff already, obviously. But that's a huge problem globally. And of course, is there any, so of course we touched on the super apps, like streaming and income. Is there anything we can push folks towards? Maybe of course if they really like what you guys are building and they want to work with you, where should they reach out?
I think probably joining our Discord and then starting to be active there, ask questions there is probably the easiest way to get our attention, right? And then just build something and show us.
Absolutely.
We run a really cool program called the Frontier Guild, which is basically a sort of, can think of it a bit as an accelerator. So
Yeah.
it's a program where we have a budget, which is a stream, that is basically, it's usually about 20K a month, and
Yeah.
that's distributed across a certain number of teams,
Hmm.
depending on biweekly votes, right? So you have a bunch of judges every 2 weeks, you check progress, and they vote, and then your stream can get really big or it could get really small, depending
Yeah.
on how well you did, right? So it's like a paid, or maybe a paid internship to build a product,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a really cool program because first of all, it really keeps you on the hook.
Yeah.
Like people deliver on this program, because
Yeah.
if they don't, their stream stops. You don't want your stream to stop, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's worked very well, but we're very selective who we let in. So,
Yeah.
building stuff first, coming to our Discord, showing it off, is usually the right way to do it.
Yeah. I love how you guys have integrated your own app across all these like different layers of like incentives and stuff like this. First of all, with the token streaming, and then with this, I think that's really cool to see. It's kind of refreshing to see like somebody who's like, you're eating your own dog food, you're using the app, and you can see like, I mean, you've got to think like, okay, we used our app to solve this for us. Is that useful for other teams in the same light? Like, uh, so yeah, it's really cool to see you guys.
Yeah.
It's such a utilitarian platform. Like there's so much that it could be used for in this sense. So yeah, just really cool to see all the ways that you guys are applying that. Um, but yeah, anything else? Anywhere we should push folks? Obviously, we'll have the Discord and the website and everything down below. So if folks are interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else?
I mean, if again, go get some sub tokens. It's very easy.
Yep.
It's an open mechanism. It's not a retroactive airdrop. It's a continuous campaign, right? So you can make yourself eligible by using apps at any point.
Yep.
And the probably easiest thing to do is mint.superfluid.finance. It's an NFT that's basically a perpetual stream, right?
Yep.
It's been going for over a year. So everybody who mints this NFT gets a part of this continuous stream. It's currently streaming about 2 ETH a month, I think, something like that, to all the people who've minted it. And it's been going for a year. So it's if we're lucky, it will never stop. And if
Yeah.
you mint it now, you'll get paid forever. So it's worth a try. That's the easiest way to get points to make you eligible for sub tokens. So
Yep.
do that, then go to claim.superfluid.org and yeah, go claim some sub, and then we'll see how it works.
Yeah. 100%. Well, yeah, dude, excellent conversation. I learned a ton about what you guys are working on and the potential here. Appreciate you hopping on and taking the time.
Yeah, same. Thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to maybe having another episode about Yolk next time.
Yeah, 100%.